What's up, Changemakers? My name is Nyarko, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of JLD Community Solutions. Now, real quick, for those of you who are not familiar with who we are a nonprofit organization established to turn our pain into purpose. In 2008, my brother lost his life to gun violence at the age of 25. And my mom and I decided that we wanted to do something to honor his life and his legacy. And so in 2010, the Johnny Leroy Dawkins Jr. Scholarship Fund was born. And for the past 16 years, we have been investing in the lives of young men of color, graduating from the school that my brother, myself, and my family graduated from at Lexington Senior High School. Now, we rebranded as JLD Community Solutions to allow our organization an opportunity to expand and grow and continue to impact the lives of these young men as well as the community as a whole. And that has become our mission. And today, in honor of Gun Violence Awareness Month, we are having what I am referring to as a crucial conversation around the topic of firearm safety. We welcome you into this conversation. And at this time, I am excited to bring to the stage one of my amazing colleagues, Mr. Ryan White. Let's get into it. All right. What's up, Ryan?
Greetings, dear. How art thou?
Thou art great. How art thou?
Amazing, amazing. I can't complain. No one will listen anyway, right?
Listen, these days there is plenty to complain about, but I am doing my very best, Ryan. I'm doing my very best to find the things to be grateful for than to complain because, whoo,
Absolutely.
if
Look,
I
I always
think
say
about
it
the
could be
things
worse,
there is
right?
there you go. It
Absolutely.
could be worse. And just to give a little bit of background, so Ryan and I both work at a financial institution, and we were just in conversation one day, and Ryan brought up the fact that he worked at a gun range. And my ears perked because as I shared with Ryan, I wanted to learn more. I was intrigued because as I shared with Ryan, my take on the whole topic of firearms and guns, I'm just like, if I could get rid of them all, I would just get rid of them all everywhere, all over the world. But one of the things that I have just become so really convicted about is having crucial conversations and allowing myself to be open to learn perspectives that I myself have not really looked at. And I realized that having someone like my colleague here, Ryan, who works, he's an instructor at a gun range who hears stories each and every day. He's able to see things and understand things from a perspective I never will.
Yep.
And so this conversation here is going to be me asking some questions and letting Ryan take the stage. How about that?
Absolutely. And like I told you, I'm long-winded, so you can stop me at any point.
That's okay. I'm here to learn. I'm here to listen, and I hope that those who tune in, they will do the same. And in whatever it is that you share, that we all walk away from something that will help us to just perceive maybe just a little bit differently in this topic.
Absolutely.
Now, the first thing I want to know, Ryan, is I want to learn about just a little bit of background about you. What was it that inspired you to even take on this job as an instructor at a gun range? And maybe if you could share with us an experience you've had or a story that you have heard from one of the individuals you've instructed that really impacted you.
Absolutely. So, like talking off the record with work, I'm a gun aficionado. I was in Boy Scouts for all of my life, for 10 years, starting in 96, and I got my Eagle Scout in 2006. But throughout scouting, I shot my first rifle at the age of, I want to say it was 10 or 11, and I've been shooting ever since. So, I have a bunch of friends and family that they either have guns or they've been around guns, but, they're not too familiar or comfortable with it. So me being, very experienced with it, I was like, off the record prior to working at the gun range, I know some things, so I can, familiarize some friends and family and people that I know to actually get comfortable with these firearms and, actually showing them. And I fast forwarding until now, well, not now, but 15 years ago, I took my concealed carry license at Caliber's gun range in Greensboro. And I've been shooting there ever since. And the manager hit me up. He said, I need somebody with some expertise and some know-how to, assist with instructing and helping me out some. So I went there. I've been working there since, helping out since, and just, expanding everyone else's knowledge who, not necessarily is not familiar, but may not know the ins and outs or not as in depth with the gun knowledge itself in general. Um, but with helping people at the gun range from all walks of life, experienced shooters, first time shooters, people who are scared that, they really don't want to shoot guns, but they know they're needed, which I know we'll get into later throughout the questioning, just getting them familiar and knowledgeable with it. There's been lots of stories that I've had from clientele at the gun range and outside of the gun range. And, a lot of stories stood out in regards to the guns and what they're capable of and what they're not capable of. But I think the second part of the question was the responsibility that comes with firearms. There's a lot of responsibility, and I think it goes twofold. In regards to the downside of firearms, you have to be responsible enough to know to keep them locked up, know they go bang if you pull the trigger, know they could accidentally discharge if you drop it a wrong way. So of course they're dangerous items. I call them tools because I'm a gun aficionado. There's a lot of dangers with these tools, but on the flip side, there's a responsibility to need it as well. With a lot of the people that I instruct, and even here recently, there's someone who was a victim of domestic violence. Somebody actually broke into her house, and she didn't have anything to protect herself outside of a kitchen knife or a cell phone to call the police. And we hear these stories all the time. So there's a responsibility if you have a gun, and if you don't have a gun, I believe there's a responsibility to defend and protect yourself as well. So I know I'm jumping ahead, but that goes in hand in reference to me wanting to familiarize everybody else, either the novice shooters or the experience, and just hearing stories and stuff of firearms in itself, basically.
That's very good, and I appreciate the way you speak about how there's a responsibility in if you are a carrier, but there's also a responsibility if you find yourself in a situation, just to know that we do have to protect ourselves. And that's the unfortunate part for me. I
Right,
feel I hate it. I hate the fact that it almost becomes one of those necessary evils almost from
right.
my perspective. It's
Mm,
just like I hate the idea that I would need it, but at the end of the day, to your point, if you ever find yourself in a position where you're vulnerable,
mhm.
you want to feel like you have the potential to protect yourself. So
Absolutely. And to piggyback off of that, like me as a gun owner and all of my other colleagues and friends and family, I have family in military and law enforcement as well here in the city. But nobody wants to use the gun, right? Nobody wants to actually have to defend themselves and actually, unfortunately take someone out in an act of self-defense. But if that threat or the opportunity prevents itself, what can you do? I use the comparison of a vehicle. Would you walk all the way to Atlanta or would you drive to Atlanta? I know it's not one and the same thing, but I reference firearms as a tool, right? If there is someone either in your house or using violence against you, what tool are you going to use and what tool is the most effective? Similarly with a vehicle, what tool is more effective, using your feet to walk or using a car to drive?
I hear you. I hear you, Ryan.
So I say,
No,
don't get me
very good
started.
though. Yep. No, no, I definitely like, when you have these conversations, like it does, it makes you have feelings. And
Right.
so, and that's why I say that for me, it's just important to open myself up to have these conversations.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, and I feel like this is a good segue into this next section, this
Hmm.
next question, especially thinking about the responsibility, right?
Hmm.
When you think about responsible firearm ownership, what do you believe people on both sides of the conversation often misunderstand about one another?
Hmm. So, like you mentioned, there's definitely two sides. What I'll say to that is, so for the inexperienced shooters or the people that are on the fence with firearms, I think the number one misconception is like the gun by itself, leading from my first answer with the first question. I think the assumption is you have this gun and you got to be super, super careful and cognizant of it going bang without, you doing anything with it. There's always it's like a conditioned precedent. The condition here is you have to actually pull the trigger. Precedent is the bang. So there's something that's needed before anything will actually happen with that firearm. So I think the number one misconception in regards to a responsibility of non shooters, if you will, is just the knowledge behind the gun itself. Of course, it's a dangerous item and it could cause harm, greatly bodily harm, leading to death, unfortunately. But it's not going to do that by itself. And then the caveat to that, in regards to shooters itself, you have to be responsible enough to know that this is a dangerous item. You do have to keep this tool, or firearm rather, you have to keep it locked up away from kids in a safe environment, being cognizant of if that firearm is loaded. There's some stories from the gun range as well where seasoned shooters, have been cleaning their gun and manipulating that firearm, not knowing that that gun is still loaded. And I had one guy, won't mention his name, he's a fairly good guy. He comes in often. He's a regular at the range. And, he accidentally shot himself, not being cognizant of
Wow.
being loaded. So that goes back
Wow.
to being responsible. One of the cardinal rules is treat every gun as if it's loaded, so, making sure that firearm is clear, making sure there's not any ammo around that firearm when you are manipulating it. And, as a novice or a beginner shooter or someone that's on the fence, knowing that that gun is not going to go bang unless you actually do something to it to make it go bang. So it's both sides, the experience side and then the unknown, if you will, for people who aren't as familiar with firearms. It's a great question.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I feel like, sometimes we can let the noise
Hmm.
inform us of how we feel about individuals on each side of the aisle
Absolutely.
and so and
Absolutely.
social media, and sometimes it'll push to you the very these really left or really right,
Right.
people that just sound really irresponsible from both
Right.
sides, you know what I'm saying? And so I think it's important for all of us to realize that regardless of what, if you are someone like myself who has found yourself maybe not so you just feel like, oh, why do we need these?
Right.
And then you also have those that are like, absolutely, this is necessary, to understand that there is a learning that has to take place on both
Absolutely.
sides. And
Absolutely.
and I feel like those are the things that will help us to move forward to a safer society with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to caveat off of that, it is terrible that we've come to this point in life, in America specifically. Everyone says America is the wild, wild west. There's guns everywhere. And in fact, that's true. There are guns everywhere. But the difference in that, and maybe I'm jumping forward into the questioning series, but the difference in that, with these guns that are out there, there's good guys and then there's bad guys, of course. But, in regards to that responsibility piece of that, I think social media and the younger generation, if you will, is definitely to the detriment of the gun community, because they show these guns as like they're a toy or something, and it's definitely not a toy. It's
It
definitely
is not.
a serious item to be cognizant of. And if fondled, that's a terrible word, but if manipulated poorly and not treated as what it is, which is a powerful tool, then that's where it leads to issues, if you will. I don't want to jump too far, but again, the younger community and definitely social media has definitely caused a huge detriment to the gun world in regards to the responsibility of firearms, unfortunately. But I won't spoil it. I'll wait till we get to that question and dive more into that.
Absolutely, yes, because I'm telling, there's just so much to say. There's so much to
Absolutely.
unpack. So we'll go into question number 3, and
Okay.
that way we can talk a little bit more. A firearm has the ability to protect life, and we've kind of touched on this
Mhm.
already. A firearm has the ability to protect life, but also to permanently take life. How do you personally carry the weight of that reality?
Yeah, so that's one of the questions that is covered. So if you take the concealed carry course here in North Carolina, I'm sure it's the same with other states as well. But it's mentioned throughout the course, the state mandated booklet that's provided. If you do own a firearm and you do intend to carry this for self-defense purposes, you have to be cognizant of the possible chance of having to utilize this firearm to defend yourself, i.e., take someone's life. Of course, thou shalt not kill if we're getting biblical, not to take away from anyone's point of views, but, it's no one's intentions to kill anyone. You ask any law abiding citizen that carries a firearm, you ask any law enforcement officer or majority of the law enforcement officers or military representative, that's not the number one intent with a firearm, owning a firearm. Me personally, would I want to do that? Absolutely not. That's definitely not my intent at all. But again, it's a tool for defense. If someone were to come into my house, if someone were to meet me in the street or something, and come at me with a firearm or another weapon, would I defend myself? Absolutely. That's what we train for, and that's what I instruct shooters for. Outside of just the sport of shooting itself, is to be proficient enough to be responsible with this firearm, knowing where to place those shots, how to place those shots, in case that opportunity meets yourself. It's a great task. I mean, it's not something that you want to think about, but it's just being prepared and having that notion in the back of your mind. If it comes down to it, this is a tool that you'll have to meet somebody else with to actually, meet that demise. But the caveat to that as well, if you don't have that tool to defend yourself, what is going to happen then? Because the aggressor on the other side, they're not thinking twice. Their intent is to rob, steal, and kill, unfortunately. And I want to be able to, and I want the people that I'm instructing to be able to meet them with where where they're at. So,
Yeah.
if there is an intruder in your house and, harming your family, of course, the police is there to call. Sometimes they're there very quickly. But 9 times out of 10, they're not going to enter that house immediately, and they might not
Right.
be there second. Statistically, I can't remember the exact time, but it literally takes seconds, for not even a second, for that firearm between the time it goes bang and that bullet projectile to come out. So, back to the question, would I want to kill somebody? Absolutely not. But, if I'm threatened or my family is threatened, then I'd rather have a tool that I can defend myself with in comparison to what they're presenting to me as the aggressor. The saying is, you can't take a knife to a gunfight. And that saying is really true. What are you going to do if somebody comes in your house with a firearm? Are you going to, this is a play on words. It sounds terrible, but are you going to throw holy water at them? No, that's not going to do anything. Of course,
Some
things
people
that are
will.
working.
Some people will. I will throw holy water. No, I'm just kidding.
Look, I will throw it after them. Matter of fact, this is not funny, but my wife says maybe we should put some holy oil on your rounds that you load into your magazines. And before I do go to work at the gun range, she does put holy oil on my actual magazines.
Wow.
you
Wow.
know
Wow.
but still, being completely serious, would I want to shoot somebody and kill somebody? Absolutely not. But if that opportunity met itself, I certainly would. And the people that I instruct, I want them to be proficient enough to do so as well. And I also want to throw out another thing too, because I've seen a lot of comments and videos as well online and with the clients coming into the range, mentioning, I don't want to shoot to kill. I just want to, demobilize them, try to shoot them in the leg, try to shoot them in the knee. Okay, so that's not practical. It's a very small object to actually hit, for one. For two, if somebody is mobile and moving, the majority of the American citizens aren't proficient enough to shoot something that small, let alone at an actual distance if you are trying to shoot a torso. So that's not real. Don't listen to social media and the internet and what you see on videos and YouTubes and stuff, because that is totally a myth. Which is where another misperception, in my opinion, comes with the gun community, especially with law enforcement. These self-defense shootings and shootings that law enforcement officers make, demobilizing somebody is not what you're trained to do. One, is too hard, and then two, it's not proficient in as well. But we don't wake up as gun owners saying, I'm going to kill somebody, I'm going to feel good about it. No, I'm going to feel terrible if I ever have to do that.
Yeah.
But I want to have enough firepower, or not necessarily firepower, but the tool to protect myself that the aggressor is going to have against me. Point, period.
And it's an interesting thing you brought up about like shooting to demobilize. I was having a conversation with one of my neighbors. She's an older,
Hmm.
a older lady.
Hmm.
She's 70 years old,
Okay.
and she was talking. She does not. She's not an owner. However, she always kids and says to me, "I'm glad I'm not, because I think I would do some damage." But she was saying how she was having a conversation with a gentleman that came over to do some work at her house, and she was talking to them about they were having the conversation around firearms and, the whole shooting to demobilize. And she said he made a point to her that she had never heard before. And I thought, this is interesting. But she was saying how he was also, saying that, no, you don't, that's not what your goal is to do, is to shoot to demobilize. It's you shoot to shoot, you know what I mean?
Right.
And he was saying that, and another issue with that is that if you were to do that, then you could put yourself more in harm's way, because then that person could come back and say, that you did something to harm them, and then it could be a whole like legal issue, for
Absolutely.
you. And
Absolutely.
when she brought that up, when he said, I'm like, things you never really think about.
Absolutely.
Just
Absolutely. And that's another point as well. So most gun owners that are concealed carrying, for that matter, there is something that's called U.S. Law Shield. There's a plethora of them out there. The best one that I've been a member of, is U.S. Law Shield. So in the event that you are inside of any kind of gun self-defense situation where you do discharge that firearm, there's dedicated lawyers, similar to like prepaid legal for like civil
okay.
cases. There's dedicated gun lawyers to help you if in that situation. There was not necessarily a client of mine, but they knew someone that had to discharge their firearm in a real life self-defense situation. They shot them. They didn't kill them. It wasn't intentional. They were just shooting because they were scared. When your adrenaline starts rushing, you don't know. Sometimes you don't know. I haven't been in a situation where I had to discharge. I pulled it, but not actually had to discharge. But your adrenaline rushes, and sometimes your training goes out the window. Sometimes you know what to do, but your rounds just they're not as accurate. But the suspect was demobilized. He wasn't killed or anything, and he actually sued the guy that was a
Wow.
law-abiding citizen. He's not in jail or anything like that. It was just punitive damages, and he had to pay monetary fees to the actual criminal because he did shoot him, and the criminal tried to commit like or claim wrongful shooting or whatever. So he did actually have to pay something for that.
Wow.
But to your point, the way I was trained from an actual BLET instructor, which is basic law enforcement training instructor, if you are using your firearm in a self-defense situation, 1 round is as good as 5 rounds. Is of course not to go anything crazy, because that is questionable. If the threat is stopped and you do continue firing, then you will put yourself in a legal situation, which does go along with your point, Dia, being cognizant of not just the actual firearm piece, but the legality behind it as well. When to stop, when it's deemed defense, defense situation. But to my point, if you are going to utilize that firearm, if somebody is still aggressing and proceeding to you, use that firearm until that threat is stopped. If they are demobilized, then fine, stop. You have to stop. But if the point is they're still shooting and they're by you, then unfortunately you're going to have to meet them with where they are. And if that reaches the demise of the suspect, then unfortunately that's what it is. But the mindset of a criminal is not the same mindset of a law-abiding citizen. So their intent is to do bad things to you, and my intent is just to protect myself and the people I love, and the people that are with me. But with that as well, like that comes another notion of knowing what to do and what not to do as well. If you and I are walking into a mall and you see a shooting going on, that doesn't mean pull your firearm and start shooting. You're going to be in trouble. You're going to prison. There's a whole mindset that comes with it outside of just knowing how to use and be decent with this actual tool. There's a lot of things that come with it as well. And I think going back to questions 1 and 2, that's the number one misconception as well. It's not just as simple as I have this firearm, I'm going to protect myself, I can do this and that. No, there's a lot more to it. You just can't brandish this firearm. I just can't start shooting if I'm not involved with something. There's an active retreat that's deemed necessary within the statutes of the state of North Carolina. I'm still jumping too far ahead of it, but there's a lot more that comes with it as well. And I think that's the number one misconception of, people who are on the fence of firearms too. Like, just because we have this gun doesn't mean we're not bound by, rules and laws and stipulations within the city and within ourselves as well. There's things that we have to hold ourselves up to from a legal standpoint as well.
And I mean, and like you have mentioned a few times, I feel like law abiding citizens are going to carry that weight a lot, the weight of that responsibility a lot
Absolutely.
more than those who are unfortunately going to
Absolutely.
be have criminal minds, you
And
know.
then just to add to that as well, so I mentioned my twin brother is a police officer in Winston-Salem, and I have a lot of buddies in Winston-Salem that are law enforcement and Greensboro as well. There have been situations where some police officers have even been scared to pull their firearms because of
Mm.
fear of legal issues or
Oh wow.
fear of the city and community accosting them and them being on the news and stuff and them almost losing their lives. So it's not just law-abiding citizens. There are also law enforcement officers locally and nationally and stuff that are scared of using their firearm as opposed to de-escalating when they have been deemed an environment where they could have used their firearm in fear of the blowback from things to them from illegal or just from a costing situation from the community. So law-abiding citizens and law-abiding officers and military personnel, we actually have to think about this stuff and be cognizant of it.
Yeah.
The perpetrators and criminals in younger generation, unfortunately, not even just younger, but just criminals as a whole, they don't care about this
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And that's why I say it's better to have a tool to meet the aggressor with, because there's rules and stipulations and laws that these criminals, they don't care about.
They're not
If
going to
they don't
follow.
care, then what
Yep.
does that leave us as law-abiding citizens?
Yep. In your experience as an instructor, what habits or mindsets or attitudes separate responsible gun owners from dangerous gun culture?
Absolutely. And that's a loaded question because it could be a lot. You could have someone who has experienced trauma from, domestic violence, or, somebody trying to, not to get too intense, but rape them, or, somebody breaking into their house with a firearm. I've had countless stories, not countless, but literally two for a fact that I can recall from people at the range stated that somebody came into their house and sexually assaulted them with a firearm. And they're sad and they're scared and they're worried, so they need a gun just in case something happens. And I've instructed them to know what to do and what not to do, and they feel prepared. I don't know why I'm doing air quotes, but they feel prepared and safe enough in case something like that happens. Now, going into the mindset of things, that could be a slippery slope, because yeah, you feel prepared and you know knowledgeable enough to use this actual firearm, but goes back to mindset. Are you cognizant enough to distinguish between somebody who is trying to do something, or are you
Mm.
depressed in the mind state of that, and should you even be using this firearm? There have been countless people that I've had to turn around from the gun range because their mindset, you can tell we have our own discretion of whether we allow people to shoot at the range or not. It's something that we're trained to look at. One, if somebody is under the influence of alcohol or drugs, definitely can't shoot. Two, if someone's acting funny and you can sense that they're in a depressed nature or just listening to the stuff that they say. Or three, if somebody that's just looking completely aggressive and acting outlandish, those are all terrible mindsets. You shouldn't be around
Mm.
firearm, and it's things that we can actually see. But with that, outside of the gun range, you don't know if people are going through those types of things. And of course, we have background checks with firearms that were ran through. But who's to say that these background checks can catch all of these things from a mindset perspective? So, as a responsible gun owner, looking at those things and pointing those things out, great. But what if you have somebody that is dealing with something, and they have a firearm or have access to a firearm? For me personally, friends that I knows, just getting on a personal level, one has been going through some things and he's been depressed a little bit. He's had a firearm. I took it from him. You shouldn't have a firearm. I'm not saying you'll do anything, but in that manic state of depression or anxiety, you never know. There's been countless stories of people who are depressed and have used that firearm to unfortunately kill themselves. So, mindset goes a long way. You can thank depression, anxiety, and then also on the flip side, you can thank these younger generation as well on social media, flaunting these firearms while drinking, while smoking and stuff. And unfortunately, the younger generation, they see that stuff. They think that's normal. They think it's cool. If, as a law-abiding citizen, if I'm carrying my firearm right now and I'm under the influence, that's a felony automatically. So just looking at those things and calling those things out and being cognizant of that. But going back to the topic of the aggressors and stuff, Most times people cause these heinous acts and they commit these crimes and stuff. I won't say they're all under the influence, but they could be in a manic rage, they could be high, or it could be drunk and stuff, and they have firearms as well. So me as a law-abiding citizen who's completely sober, I'm sleeping in my house, I have my firearm, I have somebody walk in who's under the influence with a firearm, they're not thinking logically, then what? They're not at a point where you can, try to de-escalate verbally or talk them off the ledge, if you will, because they're not in a sober mindset, So I've seen it all. I've seen the manic depressed. I've seen the anxiety. I've seen the scared. I've seen the worried as an instructor. I call it out every single time. It's just something that we, as responsible gun owners, look for, and we can tell. But just walking around the street when I'm not at the actual gun range, it's not something that you just walk up to somebody. Oh, you look depressed. Get rid of that gun. Or you look high. You shouldn't have that. That's in situations where law enforcement is to come into play. Not that I would call anybody on somebody that I see outside of, if I do see somebody drunk with a firearm, absolutely, I'm calling. But if someone's depressed and you feel with anxiety, I'm not going to call the cops. It's definitely a conversation to be had. But mindset is definitely a huge factor when it comes to firearms, because you don't know the state of mind that somebody is in.
That, and you bring up such a good point about how you handled your friend, and I think that, like you mentioned, we are going to people that you are close to, you're going to have a better read on if there is something going on, maybe mentally, that
Absolutely.
would be disturbing. And in those cases, if you are comfortable enough, it could be a life-saving thing to step up and just say, hey, let me take this for a minute, because
Absolutely, and
you
not to cut you off, but I think a lot of the mass shootings, mass shooting is relative. That's another subject. I won't go down the rabbit hole, but these mass shootings and robberies and stuff, and school shootings and all that stuff. My thing, and a lot of my friends and coworkers at the gun range, and then friends that are law enforcement and stuff, you know, what's the saying? See something, say something. I think a lot of that stuff could have been prevented if somebody could have just said something. Anybody who's listening and watching this, if you know anybody that has a firearm or has access to a firearm, and you see that they're in a diminished state, whether it be depression, anxiety, or under the influence of something, just step up, say something. It's not an attack on your friendship or whatever, but it's just being responsible. And I think if the average citizen and gun owners in the entire world, if you just step up, I think a lot of these crimes and statistics and bad notions of what guns can and can't do could be completely thwarted. It could be completely turned around, in my opinion, if you just say something. And that would just eliminate the whole notion of guns are bad, we don't need them. It's all relative. There's a plethora of things that could change things. It's not just knowing and being responsible of firearms. There's a lot of other things that can go into it as well, because it's not just guns. What if somebody's depressed, sad, drunk, under the influence, and they use a car? What if they use a baseball bat? What if they use a knife? It's all relative.
Yep, say something. See something, say something.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. Do you believe there's an emotional or mental maturity that should come with owning a firearm? And if so, what does that look like to you?
Absolutely. And I kind of commingled question 4 and 5 together. If you're not mature enough, if you're going through something, and basically, if you're not mature enough, you definitely should not have a gun. It's a deep question, and it's definitely something that's asked whenever you do a background check and when you go through the actual concealed carry course as well. Maturity is huge. That's why they make the rule you can't buy a pistol until you're 21. Thinking, logically, by the age of 21, you're mature enough to drink, you're mature enough to do adult things, if you will. But in certain cases, you reach 21, or if you reach 31 or 40, you're still not mature. Everyone is different, unfortunately. It's definitely a mindset thing, and not everybody should have a firearm at all. They shouldn't have access to it at all. And that goes back to my same thing that I mentioned with the last question. See something, say something. If you see someone that's not mature enough to own and manipulate a firearm, don't let it happen. The age range at my shooting range, you have to at least be 12 years old to shoot. If you deem your child mature enough and they're safe enough to shoot it, absolutely, by all means, do it. I mentioned I started shooting at 10 years old. I was mature enough. I was trained. I'm responsible with it. But again, you can tell the signs of people that come in there. A lot of times it's the younger generation, unfortunately, because of social media. You think that you turn 18, because at our range, if you're under 21, you can shoot with someone that's at least 21 if they're a parent or a guardian. You see this stuff on social media. Oh, I'm bad enough. I can shoot. Well, sometimes you're not mature enough. And if that does happen, you definitely should not have a firearm in your hand at all. And that's another issue with the younger generation these days, getting these illegal firearms on the streets. These kids aren't 21. They're definitely not mature enough to have any type of firearm or weapon in their hand. And that goes back to the rules. They're breaking the rules. You shouldn't have this firearm anyway. So what do you think they care about the rules when it comes to doing a heinous crime? They don't care. But maturity is huge. If you're not mature enough, whether you're 21, 40, 50, or 60, you shouldn't have a firearm. One more story, and I'll let you get to your next question. There was an older lady that called into our gun range. This was probably about a couple of months ago. It was still cold out. And she says, I'm getting at an older age. I think I have Alzheimer's setting in, and I have a bunch of firearms in the house. I know I shouldn't have them. I just need somebody to come pick them up. Is that something that you all can take? And that's a mature type of response, knowing that you're not responsible enough. You're coming to a state where you shouldn't have these firearms. Let's take them. Good, perfect, great on you. That's a great job. You should not have this firearm. And I think if we got to that point as a society and as a community where you see someone who shouldn't have a firearm, or you as yourself don't think you should have a firearm, there's no harm in saying I don't need this anymore, and somebody needs to come get it.
Wow. And when you say things like that, it's almost like unicorn. You don't even think people like
Absolutely.
this truly
Absolutely.
exist who would be responsible enough to say, "Can you please come and get this and take this
Absolutely.
from me?"
And I bought one from
Yeah.
her too.
Oh, look at you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you brought up another good point. Unfortunately, that we have individuals who are also very immature and not responsible enough that they would be willing to sell to minors in a black market,
Mhm.
and that also continues to perpetuate all of the fear around these tools, as you
Yep.
say. It continues to perpetuate all this fear because they're just individuals who are going to just choose to be irresponsible. It's
Absolutely.
unfortunate.
And that goes to my point as well. There's not a shortage by any means of black market illegal guns out there, which goes to my point. If these young illegals have these firearms, they're not responsible, they're not mature. Why is it fair for them to meet me with a firearm or a weapon that they shouldn't even allow? And then for me, whether I'm comfortable or not comfortable with that firearm, to just be a regular law abiding citizen thinking that I'll be fine and free of any not danger or harm is what I'm trying to say. Excuse me, it's been a long day. Why would I be free of any danger or harm out there as an American citizen? I'm safe enough to just walk around. And unfortunately, like you mentioned at the start of the call, we've gotten to a point of that's not the world anymore, unfortunately. Again, there's not a shortage of any firearms out there. So, if you're not a gun fan, this is not a shot at you, but as a law-abiding citizen, you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not at least getting yourself comfortable with the firearm. Not necessarily saying you need to go out and buy a firearm tomorrow, but again, if it comes down to it, you're threatened with your family at the shopping mart, at a church. What's the best thing that's going to protect you and your family? Of course, calling 911, but again, they're only going to be there for the cleanup, unfortunately.
Very sad, but very good point. Very, very good point. And this kind of takes us into our next question, number 6. And I mean, I feel like you really spoke
Mhm.
to this, but maybe you have something additional that you would want to add to this next question. What's something you wish people who are uncomfortable around firearms understood about people who choose to own them? And on the other side, what do you think that firearm advocates could better understand about people whose lives have been directly impacted by gun violence?
Absolutely. And that's a loaded question as well, but as simple as this, you know, as law-abiding citizens, we're the good guys. Would you rather have a threat or something happen where you are in the public and there's nobody around as a good guy or a good woman to assist you and help you, as opposed to just those dangerous criminals out there looking to do harm, steal, kill, and destroy? I think the number one misconception is that everybody who has a firearm that are good guys are just gonna erroneously accidentally shoot somebody, and that's not the case. Most law-abiding citizens who are gun owners, we're very responsible. We follow the rules. We try to do the right thing because at the end of the day, we don't want to ruin our constitutional rights. Which is the right to carry. If we do something wrong or we commit a crime, then our God-given right is going to be taken away from us. So all people who own guns aren't just criminals. We're law-abiding citizens. We have families. We have great jobs, just like everyone else. So as long as we're being responsible, I would rather have somebody that's a responsible law-abiding citizen on my side versus just that criminal out there looking to do harm and only relying on having to call 911. In that second part of that question, I understand that there have been gun violence out in America, not taken away from that at all. That is completely terrible. Whether that is from a bad guy doing something to a good guy, or an accidental situation, or just wrong place, wrong time. But at the end of the day, all things aren't bad things. Bad things do happen, but there are countless accounts of people doing great things with firearms as well. Just recently, didn't make the news, but just recently there was a law-abiding citizen that helped a law enforcement officer. There was nobody else there at the time, and that law-abiding gun owner, assisted that police officer when there was nobody else to assist them. And if that law-abiding citizen that was a law-abiding gun owner wasn't there, then that could have been the demise of that police officer. Unfortunately, bad things do happen. There's no way around that. Gun violence is gun violence. It could meet you where you least expect it. People have family members that have demised, unfortunately, due to gun violence. That is completely sad, and I don't want to take any away from that. Take anything away from that. It's completely sad and egregious. I don't wish that on anybody. But not taking away from any of that, so no harsh feelings if anyone watching has a loved one that's been taken away from gun violence. But there's been countless people who have had loved ones pass away from vehicle accidents as well. There have been loved ones who've passed away from alcoholism and drug abuse as well. So what are we going to do? Are we going to take away liquor stores? Are we going to take away pharmacies? Are we going to take away vehicles? All of that stuff's not going to be taken away. And, statistically, I don't know the stats right now, but the FBI hasn't posted on their websites. There have been lots of more vehicle accidents and drug overdoses that have resulted in deaths than gun violence. The only issue is guns are guns. It's looked at in a more negative manner. And of course, you could kill more people with a firearm in regards to the rapid fire and the amount of bullets that can be held in a magazine, of course, in comparison to a vehicle or, alcohol. But my thing is, how is it fair as a law-abiding gun owner that, these are put into question when there are heinous crimes that are, perpetuated with firearms, as opposed to somebody taking a vehicle and running them through a parade full of people, or somebody taking alcohol and making it into a Molotov, or somebody just taking alcohol and drinking and going out and beating people up with a baseball bat or stabbing somebody. Why aren't cars and alcohol and drugs taken into the same regard as firearm when they're used in just the same heinous act? So it's all relative, in my opinion, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, I guess when you think about it, anything could be dangerous. I mean, if we think
Absolutely.
about it, paper can give you paper cuts,
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. And then
and
you look
so,
at these other countries as well, like New Zealand. Guns are banned there. But look at all of the attacks. Just Google it. How many knife attacks have been in New Zealand and Australia? There's another country where there was a mass stabbing as well. There's always going to be a method for a crime to be done. If there's not any guns, cool. Somebody's going to use something else. And we had the conversation, you and I, a couple of weeks ago. Like, if there was a ruling and, the government came down and said nobody can have guns at all, so be it. Fine. I don't need one. I'm fine without having it because no one else is going to have a gun, But if knives are still available, then I'm going to have a knife too. If the criminal is going to have a knife, I want to have the exact same thing that the criminal is going to have. You know, If the ruling was, I'm going to take the Second Amendment away and no more guns allowed, fine, I'm fine with that. There's not a problem, no harm, no foul. That's the rule. That's the rule. I will follow
Yeah.
it. Again, I'm a law-abiding citizen. But if the rule is there and I can have a firearm to protect myself, I think everybody should have, the free will to follow after that statute, or the Constitution rather, which is the Second Amendment.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, some of the hard parts around these conversations too is because, like I said, sometimes the noise gets louder than these reasonable conversations.
Absolutely.
And when you hear rhetoric, like, especially because my thing is, you should be able to feel safe anywhere you go.
Absolutely.
And you certainly should be able to feel safe in your home. Your children should be able to feel safe at school. Anyone should be able to feel safe when they're at their place of worship.
Right.
These are places that should just be like sanctuaries,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and sometimes, especially like when children aren't, safe, and there's certain situations where children are specifically harmed, and then there's rhetoric that starts to come out and say, oh, well, it's not guns that kill, it's the people that because it can sound insensitive, and then that can be some of the things that then makes a person feel a bit more enraged to say, how could you not see that something needs to be done? Why would you be so insensitive to say something like that?
Yeah.
Um,
And to
and
your point, I
yeah,
completely, sorry to cut you off there. I
no,
completely agree, because that's a great point that you made, because I was going to bring that up as well. There is a saying, and the rhetoric behind it is completely misconstrued. And when these bad things happen, I think the media and the personnel and, gun lobbyists and gun aficionados like myself, they could word things differently, especially behind the guns don't kill people, people kill people. I don't like that notion, because I mean, in theory, it is correct, but it does come off kind of insensitive at times, But at the end of the day, people are going to be people, and heinous crimes are going to happen regardless. And all I personally, you know, if you had a good guy there, would the outcome be different? Is all I can add to that. Is all I can say. I mean, it is insensitive. I definitely can understand that and get that, but it's a whole mindset thing. It goes back to maturity,
yeah,
responsibility, and
we
and all of that. And I don't know. It's just a loaded thing.
absolutely. Yeah, and none of these questions or this conversation is like you go into it thinking that, okay, we're gonna solve this thing. You know what I
Right.
mean? But at the end of the day, I think that there is healthy conversations that can be had that
Absolutely.
can then lend to helping to make the situation better as we have more of these kinds of conversations, and then
Absolutely.
action that happens behind it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In your opinion, what are some of the deeper issues in society that contribute to violence beyond just the presence of firearms? And you've kind of talked about this too. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hate to keep on saying it, beating the dead horse, but social media, in my opinion, like, the days are different. It's not the same
it
thing
is.
as going into a disagreement and just having to worry about fighting and stuff. Nowadays people are trying to look cool, if you will. There is a rise in young youth in gangs and stuff these days, and the gangs these days, they're not just using words and fighting and stuff. They're using firearms, unfortunately. And most of these situations, you're not seeing the older, mature individuals doing all of these crimes most of the time. Statistically proven through the FBI again, a lot of these crimes are happening in the young community. Sad to say, and a lot of times it's in the urban communities as well. And I think that goes back to social media. Unfortunately, it's looked at as a thing of fun. You see these young kids on social media out and about, getting high, drinking and stuff, and having firearms and music videos and stuff. And, it's looked as a fashion statement, if you will. Nowadays, you're not cool unless you have a nice belt on with a gun behind it and stuff. And, I think that's a downfall of gun aficionados and people who are responsible with guns. I don't even want anybody knowing that I have a firearm, because, they might look at me and like, oh, is this a young guy just trying to be cool again, and, just trying to flaunt what he has? And, you know, I think it's social media all over again, and it's just sad. I mean, it's hard to combat that. That goes back to what I was saying. You see something, say something. If you see these young kids with firearms, you know they have access to it. Say something. You know, what parent wants to tell on their child with a firearm? Most of them don't. But at the end of the day, if that's going to lead their child to being, arrested or ultimately getting in a gunfight with somebody else and ultimately dying, I'd rather than being told on go to jail for a little bit and come back home and getting rehabilitated as opposed to just letting it go and turning a blind eye to it and something bad happening. And I think that's how, as a community, you were asking the last few weeks what we could do as a community and thwart, you know, gun violence. And I think it's just saying something. There's
Yeah.
plenty of hotlines out there that you can call, plenty of people that you can reach out to. If you call the gun range, somebody like myself who is an instructor, we know the numbers and the people to reach out to. If you see something, say something. That's not necessarily snitching. And that's another thing too that I don't like, that misconception of I'm a snitch. You don't need to be telling on anybody, but snitching could help lead to that rehabilitation of people joining gangs and thinking they need a firearm just to defend themselves and not even old enough to legally own a firearm. And I think as a community, saying something, whether that be a friend at school, whether that being a coworker that looks stressed out, they could, be thinking something terribly. I'm doing air quotes again, say something. And I think that's what might lead to the turnaround in regards to guns in itself.
Yeah, oh my goodness, I could not agree more. And I was watching this documentary recently where there was this young boy who had, taken the lives of a couple of females,
Mhm.
and he called his biological father, who he had been estranged from many years of his life, and they reconnected in his older age. And he called his biological father out of nowhere and just basically told his biological father everything that he had done. And the biological father was the one who had to make the hard decision to call the cops and turn his son in. And when his son learned that it was his father that did it, and they had a conversation while he was in jail, and he's like, "Yeah, they told me you did it." And his father's like, "Yeah, why? And why do you think that?" And you could tell this conversation that the father was having with him, it was so heartfelt. Like
Yeah,
he was like, let him know, like, it's not because I hate you, but I had to do this because
absolutely.
I knew that if I didn't, this would have happened more. You were
Yeah.
going to have, and he's like, yeah, you're right. I was. I absolutely
See?
was. And he
Exactly.
made it clear to him there's three reasons right now why we have to fix this. And he was letting him know, like, this one lady that you took her life, her fiance, her son,
Mhm.
her family, they are crying and they are sad because of what you did. And so I think it's important that the ones of us that are in the lives of these individuals, that we stop being afraid or whatever the
Mhm.
case may be and say something and hold people
Absolutely.
accountable.
Absolutely. There's been countless videos. I watch a lot of body worn camera footage on YouTube, a lot of stuff that we watch at the gun range as well. But a lot of these crimes that have happened, whether it be a mass shooting or whether it just be somebody being robbed and killing somebody else through gang violence, the family and friends, they all, not all of them, but the majority of them come back and say, I knew something like this would happen. I knew he'd do something like this. And, that just hurts me to the core. Like, if you knew something, why didn't you say something? And that could have solved a lot of issues. And I think that's what will solve issues as a community with all the things that are going on nowadays. Like these people that are in gangs and stuff, and the kids that go to school with them, what these people are into. And I think they have a bad notion of being labeled as a snitch, or somebody might come back and do something to them. There's anonymous lines that you can reach out to and just say something that could completely prevent bad things from happening. So anybody who's watching, if you see something, know something, say something. As simple as that. It could stop a lot of things. And if you are a parent and you have family members and kids, that are up to no good, it's not a bad thing. You don't dislove them because you're trying to prevent things from happening. If anything, it's showing more love than not love, because you're trying to help. So I think that's the number one misconception of, being scared to say something.
That's it. Because hindsight is 2020. And while
Absolutely.
you're in whatever age you are in or in the moment you are in, and you think, well, I'm not going to be that snitch, I'm not going to be, but just think about it. 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, if you were that person that said something and you changed the trajectory of that person's life as well as prevented any harm from happening, you're going to see things much different years down the road. And you're going to be grateful that you were that person that said
Absolutely,
something.
absolutely. And then making it personal, my older brother, he did. I want to say it was 9 or 10 years in the U.S. Army. He's honorably discharged now, but he had 3 tours of active duty, and he was active duty. He was active duty, and he had 3 combat tours. And when he came back, he wasn't right all there in the head. And at the time, this was many years ago, he was very depressed and stuff, and the PTSD was getting at him. And he had firearm, and through his VA, we anonymously made some calls on him specifically, and we took all of his firearms and stuff. And it wasn't because we didn't love him. It's because we did love him that we had to say something before something egregious happened. And if I can do it, to my own brother, why can't anyone else do it to theirs? And I just had to make it personal because I've been in the other seat. I'm not just talking it; I've actually done it with my brother. And then earlier I mentioned how I did it with my friend as well. So
Great, great, great. I mean, leadership and showing like you
absolutely,
can take the lead to do that. So
absolutely,
great examples.
absolutely.
Um, I could ask you so many more questions, and I feel like a couple of more of these questions we've really already touched on. So the last thing in wrapping this conversation
Mhm.
up, the question that I would like to ask you is, if every person watching this conversation walked away remembering just one thing about responsibility, humanity, and the value of life, what would you hope it would be?
Yeah, and I love that you had that question last. So, with that, I'll say firearms aren't a bad thing. They are what you make of it. My dad used to always say that. Of course, they're a tool of destruction, but they're a tool for good as well. If you call 911 or if you go into the military, what do all of them have? They have firearms. So if they were that bad, why would anyone want to have to call 911? Because they're going to come with a gun anyway. It's just a matter of being responsible with that firearm, being comfortable with that firearm. And if you're not, growing to be familiar. That's not to say everybody go out and just rush to the stores and buy a firearm. Not at all. But I will advise, and I recommend that you just at least go to a gun range and just try it out, see if you like it. If you don't like it, cool. You don't have to buy one, but just give it a try. Not everybody just automatically starts walking and they get a driver's license and start driving a car, right? Same thing with a firearm. You don't just pick up a firearm and you're completely comfortable, you know what to do with it, you're John Wick out here. That's not how it works. It's the same thing with as a baby. You got to walk before you crawl. And I think that comes with being responsible, having willingness to get familiar with the firearm, because at the end of the day, it's a tool if you use it right. And not all firearms are meant to be used as a self-defense situation either. There's all kinds of shooting out here. I shoot recreationally as well. We do target shooting. I do lots of courses and competitions as well. That's what I do on my spare time. I skeet shoot as well, shooting those clays out of the sky. We have hunting as another use for firearms as well. So they're not all bad. We just have those few bad apples that make it bad for the masses, unfortunately. And again, with guns being the way they are, that's how they're looked at in a more negative connotation as opposed to a vehicle, which could also be bad as well. There's all different walks of life for vehicles, the same way there's all different walks of life for firearms as well. So don't automatically look at them as a bad thing, because bad things happen. There's a lot of good things that happen with firearms as well. It's just I wish that the news and media and social media in the world had those positive connotations with firearms as well. And I think that's what would give it a better light as well, because there's thousands of stories out there that supersede all the bad things in regards to how firearms save people as well, and how firearms have gotten people away from depression and stuff out of recreationally shooting and stuff, how firearms feed families through hunting, how firearms are collector's items just like shoes or fine coins and stuff. There's a lot of different things out there with firearms that are in a good light as opposed to just bad. So I look at it in a good way, get familiar, get comfortable. You don't have to buy one, just give it a shot. There's a lot of people that have had bad connotations with firearms that I won't say I convince them, or but they, at the end of the day, oh, this is the reactions that I got. Oh, this isn't as bad as I thought. I do like this. I'm gonna try to take a couple classes and get familiar. Take some classes. You don't have to have a firearm to take classes. I'm at the Greensboro gun range at Calibers in Greensboro. Come by. I'll help you out. I'll show you a walkthrough. You don't have to shoot. I'll let you hold one. Just get familiar, and give it a shot, instead of just writing it off as a complete bad thing. Again, bad things happen, but a lot of good things happen as well, and they're not as bad as you think.
Ryan, this has been I can't tell you how much I have appreciated this conversation. I just want to say I really love how you brought out the fact that they can be used to feed families too,
Absolutely.
because absolutely hunting. There's a and I will digress after I say this, but I've really come to enjoy one of my favorite YouTubers, and I told you about her becoming a farm girl, Cassandra becoming a farm girl,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
I cannot tell you how much this girl lit up when she learned how to hunt, and
Uh-huh.
she killed her first deer,
Absolutely.
and she was able to skin it,
Yep.
and she broke it down, and she butchered her own meat from the deer that she was able to take herself,
Absolutely.
and she just beamed, from it.
Absolutely.
And I was looking like, oh, I was horrified because I'm like, oh my gosh, like how are you even taking? But I say that to say, you have made some really good points, and I really, really appreciate having this conversation with you, and one that can leave in a positive light versus something that's just so controversial and antagonistic.
Absolutely.
So thank you for taking the time to come on and have this conversation with me. And I am going to make a decision I'm going to come by and check you out at Calibers. And
Please
I
do.
encourage,
Please do.
yes,
Please do.
yes.
All the
So
followers and the viewers out there as well, come by. I'm there on the weekends primarily. And thanks for having me. It is a tough subject, tough topic, and it's a sore spot between many out there, unfortunately, but it's not as bad as you think. And just give it a chance is all I can say.
thank you again, Ryan. I appreciate it. And for all of you who have taken the time to watch, we really appreciate it. Again, this is Gun Violence Awareness Month. This is also #WearOrange. So we encourage you to the first weekend in June to wear orange in solidarity, and to honor the lives of those who have been lost to gun violence. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your time, and let's be safe.
Take
Goodbye,
care.
everyone.